Hey there, good afternoon, and welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show. This is a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So, the episode we're doing right now is called This Week. And this week is an episode that I do every week to talk about what's going to be going on the channel this week, about upcoming things that may be in the works for this channel. There's a few different things, but basically it's just an informative channel to talk about what's going on here. But before we get going too far, I wanted to talk about something I've noticed over the year, maybe a year and a half now, I guess it is. Not quite, but closing in on it. But I not only just listen to a lot of music now, more than I've ever listened to, and make videos on it, which I enjoy doing those things, but I also watch a lot of other channels, or I listen to albums on the internet. And then one of the things I found that I do quite a bit now, and I've done since the beginning, is I read the comments that people make, so I can try to get some understanding of what people are looking for and what people like. And I was actually kind of surprised to notice this, because I'm a music lover and I love all kinds of music. Hence the reason why I'm doing this. I've dedicated a lot of my life to doing this. I seek out albums that I know that may never get listened to on the radio and stuff like that. But I see on a lot of these videos that I'm watching that there's a lot of comments made by people who are music fans too, but just a different type of music fan. They're interested in, just to give you an understanding of this, is I grew up in a time period where you got all of your music listening to from the radio or whatever you would read in one of the magazines, or perhaps you went to a concert and seen this stuff. But generally speaking, or basically it's whatever the media fed you, and the media is radio stations as well. So whatever they force fed you, or fed you, whether it's forced or not, that's the music you listen to. So if you didn't make the radio, or you didn't get written about, or they didn't talk about you on TV programs and stuff like that, you didn't get listened to. Unless you were a band touring, and then maybe you get some attention from your live concerts. People would go to see you out of curiosity or whatever, and you get some attention that way. But generally speaking, most people wouldn't fork out the money to go see a band that they hadn't heard on the radio. That's just the way it was, So these bands struggled. Okay, so where am I going with this, really? So I read lots of comments about, oh, this band is criminally underrated, or this band should have been bigger, or this band should have been a great legendary band, all kinds of stuff like that, or it's a shame that this band never made it big, or this band should have been a big band, or any of that kind of stuff. What I read into this is people's disappointment in the fact that this band isn't recognized to the highest esteem that they think they should be. Am I wrong? I don't know, but I think I'm correct here. So, what I wanted to talk about was this. Is this a great album? Is it? I think it is. I think it's one of the great rock albums in the history of rock music. What about this one? Is this a great album? Is it in the same status with this one? You tell me. If you were asking me personally, I would say, yeah, it is. This is a great album. Is it as great as this one? Maybe even greater. Am I going to take hits for saying that? Probably. Because here's what I discovered, is that people who like this, they heard it on the radio, they bought it. This is a massive, massive selling album. A commercial giant. This is a prototype for what record labels want to hear from heavy metal and hard rock bands. Does that make this a bad album? Or does it make it a great album? I think it's a great album. It doesn't matter how they view it to me at all. It's a great album. It's one of the legendary rock albums of all time. There are people out there, though, who will say this is the greatest album of all time. And there are people out there who will say this is a piece of junk that should be thrown in the trash can. I've heard both. This one, if you were to ask those people what they think of this album, they will tell you definitively, one way or the other. There may be some that are indifferent to it, but know of it. There's very few people that won't know of this album. This one's a different story. There are people who love this album. I'm one of them, who think it's as good or better than that one. But there are more people, there's probably quite a few people who don't think this is the great album at all. But there's more people that don't even know it exists. It doesn't exist for them. If you were to show them, they would have no idea what this is. They wouldn't even know where to begin to say anything about it because they don't know any of it. They've never heard any of it. So, what's my point? My point is that there's basically two types of music listeners. There's the ones that the record labels and the mass media and radio stations, the modern radio stations, and a lot of the YouTube, even a lot of YouTube and a lot of music outlets. They cater to that group of people, and that group of people, I'm afraid to tell you, makes up at least 90% of people who listen to music because they're casual listeners. They are not watching this show because they're casual listeners. They're completely and utterly satisfied with whatever the media feeds them. If it's the same, like if I wanted to listen to Styx on a radio station, I'm going to hear one of maybe 4 or 5 tracks, and that's all they're going to give me. You know, even when they put out that new album a couple years ago, they put it out and they would mention it on the radio. Oh yeah, Styx has a new album. And then they would play Come Sail Away. Or they would play, Grand Illusion. Or Blue Collar Man. Or Too Much Time on My Hands. Or Mr. Roboto. Or one of those songs would come on and that's what they would play. They don't play any of the new stuff because they're there to cater to the mass listeners, the people who just want to hear the stuff that they are familiar with. They don't want to hear anything new. They like the stuff they're listening to, and that's all they care about. I have a guy who I work with. We work together. It's just the two of us on the shift. We do the same job. We rotate around and do stuff. And he loves music. He listens to music at work all day long. I don't listen to any music at work all day long for the pure fact that I don't like the radio, so I never listen to it. Where he will listen to the radio, he'll bring his playlist and he'll put them on his cassette and play them all day long. But it's always the same stuff. He never listens to anything new, and I'll say to him, you like that group? Yes, I love that group. I said, I'll pick a group for he likes Jethro Tull, so I sing the song Fat Man. He loves that song. He will listen to that song ad infinitum. Loves it to death. I said, oh, do you like this song? Skating Away on the Thin Ice of Day. Oh, I don't know if I know that one. How about Bungle and Jungle? Oh, yeah, I love that song. That's great, man. What about Aquila? Oh, I love that. What about Minstrels in the Gallery? Or how about Steel Monkey? No idea what they are. Does that make him less of a music liker than me? I don't think so. I think that there's people that the commercial people cater to, and that's what they're always going to cater to. They're always going to cater to that. So what I'm trying to tell you is that when I'm making this channel and when I'm doing these videos, that isn't for them. Because they're not watching. They don't care. And if by chance they do watch, they'll think, why is he talking about this? Who cares about this album? Nobody. This is a crappy album, they're going to say. Nobody's ever heard of it. That's their measure of music. Nobody's ever heard of it. Nobody knows what it is. And it's never played on the radio. So why would you bother wasting your time? It wasn't very good. That's why it didn't make it. It's a pretty narrow vision. I don't share it. And I think most of the people who come on this channel, who watch me regularly, don't share that either. I know that because they love to hear about this stuff. They love this album. Or maybe they don't like this particular one, but they like something equally obscure. So what I'm trying to say is that if commercial success makes an album great, this may be the greatest album. Or maybe it's Michael Jackson's Thriller, however you want to look at it. The point is, if selling an album makes the album great, then this is one of the greatest of all time. But if musical content, originality, musicianship, song arrangements, great guitar, fantastic drums, unusual noises that you never hear, combining all that stuff into a great album makes an album great, this is your man. This is your man. Or in this case, your tongue. It's kind of a weird cover, I admit it. But so people out there who say that, oh, Gentle Giant, I hear this all the time about Gentle Giant. They're criminally underrated. They should have been one of the greatest rock bands in history. They should have been at the top of the game. They should have been right up there with Yes, Rush, Pink Floyd, Genesis. Yes, they should have. But what would have happened if that had happened? My experience with bands is when they're playing great music and then all of a sudden they get a huge hit. A good example of this is Genesis. They had that hit, Follow Me, Follow You, on their third album. They were already moving that direction. As soon as they had that, they knew that they could write commercially successful songs. So what happened? They became a commercial giant. They produced some of the best commercial stuff out there in the 80s and 90s. They're considered by the people who listen to that stuff to be a great band. But those same people, if you ask them, sorry, just trying to get it out. What do you think of this Genesis album? What's that? And you tell them this track's on. They don't know any of it. It's not that some of this stuff isn't played on the radio too. It is. But it isn't commercial. And so they don't know it. Most of those people who call them Genesis fans couldn't tell you anything that Peter Gabriel sang on the album. Why? Because they don't know it. They don't. So the point I'm trying to make, and I've already said it once, I'm going to say it for the last time, and then we're going to move on from this because I've taken up way too much time on this. I just wanted to bring it up. This YouTube site, this channel, is dedicated to the people who like this, or who like something equally as obscure. You know, maybe they like Nectar, or maybe they like the band that I'm going to do on Ben's album challenge this week, which is The Angels, Face to Face. Yes, we did that last week, but guess what? We got the wrong. One of us got the wrong album. The one doing the video here. We're going to do the Australian version. They may love that, but up until that album was presented to me, I had no idea who they were. And I'm not alone. And I'm a person who seeks out and looks for new music, and yet I did not know about them. You can count that the vast majority of people out there know nothing of this band that I'm going to do. But that's who I'm doing this for. I'm doing this for the people who want to know this stuff, who love this stuff. That's what we're doing here. So, was this criminally underrated? I don't know. Should it have been big news? Should it have been up there with the AC/DC album? I don't know. Do I care if it should have been or shouldn't have been? I do know that. I don't care. Because if these guys had become like this album, they'd had the success on an album, what do you think they would have done? Would they have continued to make obscure stuff? No, they would try to latch on to whatever commercial success they had, and I'm not saying they would have. Maybe they wouldn't have. Maybe they would have been different. Maybe they would have said, you know what, we're sticking to our guns and we're going to do it. I would applaud them for that. And I actually believe they probably might have done that. But there's a chance that they could have went commercial and became just like Genesis. Not that the Genesis stuff that's going on right now, or the Genesis stuff that went on in the 80s and 90s was bad. It wasn't. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but that's just my opinion. The Genesis stuff that came on in the 70s, to me, is the great Genesis stuff. But if you measure it in sales versus their stuff in the 80s and 90s, it's a joke. It is. It's a joke. Those albums are a joke to the people who are buying the stuff out there. And that's just the way it is. So I never wish for this band to be huge. To me, they're big. I love them. They have a lot of albums I haven't even yet listened to, and I already know that I'm looking forward to years of getting to know this band like I did with bands like Genesis and Yes in the 70s and 80s. I had lots of stuff to listen to. It was like something great every week, something new and great. And I look forward to it with this band and some of the other bands that I've been listening to. So my point is, it doesn't matter whether a band is hugely commercial successful. If you like them, that's all that matters. And that's all this matters. I am not an expert in music. I'm not a album critic who has great credentials. I am not a guy who is a music connoisseur, or whatever the word is. I'm not a music guy who's great musically. I'm not a guy who has a lot of great musical attributes. I'm not a guy with a history a mile long on all these different stuff that I've done. I've not done any of those things. What I am is a guy who likes music and wants to present it and tell people why he likes it. And if they like it the same way, that's great. If they don't like it the same way, that's great too, because they may like it in a way that I never thought of before, and then I'll have something new to think about, right? Anyways, that's enough of that. That went on fairly lengthy, but I just wanted to talk about that because I see that a lot. Just because a band doesn't sell 1 billion albums, or in the case of that AC/DC album, 30 million albums, doesn't mean it's less of an album. It's how you feel about it. I like that Gentle Giant album, which probably sold 1/30th of what that album sold, maybe even less. But to me, they're the same. They're both great albums. You can be commercially successful and have a great, great album, or you can be commercially unsuccessful and have a great, great album. Just because it doesn't have 1 billion copies out there doesn't mean that it isn't a great album, in my opinion. So I don't know if anybody shares that opinion, but that's the way I feel about it. Okay, now on to this week. This is going to be a bit longer of an episode because of my tirade or rant or whatever you want to call that. That was just basically me just talking about some of the things I see and why I think music, to people that are coming on this to watch, transcends commercial success. That's just my opinion. The people who are liking that commercial stuff, God bless them, that's great. But they're not coming on here to see me anyway, so I'm not worried about it. Okay, so this week is week 20, which will go from November the 27th to December the 3rd. And we have scheduled, let me see, other than this episode, we have an additional 6 normal episodes and then 3 from the series, the first 3 from the series. So tonight, so after this episode will come out, tonight we will be doing Ben's album challenge again. This time we will get the Right Angels and the Right Face to Face, and I think I'm going to like this quite a bit. I've listened to 1 track already and I like it, so I think it's going to be a great thing. They're an Australian band. Okay, so the third video of the week will be my Monday night look back at a classic rock album, in which we are going to be doing this one, King Crimson's In the Wake of Poseidon. It's their 2nd album. It's been on my playlist for I think about 5 months, maybe a little longer. I mean, it'd be about 5 months, I think. And I'm doing King Crimson. There's a few bands I'm doing this with. But King Crimson's one of those bands that I got the first album because I had never owned a King Crimson album before the first one, and I decided I would do them chronologically to see what kind of an effect that will have on me listening to them. Because sometimes you come in at a group at a certain kind of spot, and then that's where you, if you like it, that's where you generally focus on, and then going forward, you may like what's going forward, and you may not even understand what happened from behind. So I'm coming in with King Crimson at the beginning, and this is their second album, and the third one is not on my playlist yet, but it's in the list to go on there, and that's Lizard, of course. So we'll be talking about this album on Monday night, look back at a classic rock album. So number 3 is Wednesday Night Favorites. This brings up the topic of when you're doing this series this week. Sometimes you pick stuff at the beginning when you do this, and you say to yourself, "Okay, I'm going to do that," and then somewhere along the line it doesn't really match up to what you wanted to do, so you change it. So I just want people to understand I'm not going to list something that I'm not sure of anymore, because I did that last week with the UFO on the Friday Night Live experience, and if there had been 1 or 2 people that had tuned in to watch that because they were looking forward to it, I kind of disappointed them because I didn't do it, because I couldn't find anything on the UFO that I felt fit the scenario of what I wanted to do. So I ended up doing an album that I was going to do, like probably next week, would have been this week, but I decided to do that instead. So unless I'm 100% sure that I'm going to do something, I'm not going to list it in this week again. I will just leave it as blank, and that's what's going to happen here, because I haven't really decided or thought too much about what I want to do for my favorites this week. I don't know if I want to do another top 10, or maybe I want to do a 25, or maybe I want to talk about some musical attribute or something like that. I haven't decided yet. We'll see how it goes as the week goes, so I'm just letting you know in advance that hasn't been decided. Friday Night Live experience, the same thing. I have not decided on what to do for this week. I have a couple of ideas, but I will be going to the record store tomorrow. I have to go uptown to where I live and and I will probably, while I'm there, go to there. And if I see something that I had, like there's quite a few live albums I had before that I don't have anymore because they were vinyl, and if I happen to see one of them, I may do an episode on that. Or if I find something new, I may do an episode on that. So we'll see what happens. So I'll leave it for tomorrow, next week. So the Wednesday and the Friday night episodes have not been determined yet. Okay, there was an episode that was actually supposed to come in between the two of them, and it will. It's my hauls for the week. We've got a fairly extensive haul, which includes all the stuff in the where my hand is up and the ones on top, because they don't fit into the racks properly. They're not cases. They're called this, like kind of like this packaging, but they're bigger. So we'll be talking about that on the hauls, which is my monthly show that I do on whatever I've purchased or bought or been given or gotten in some way for that month that's new to, like I got it at, it's not necessarily new, it could be a reused album that I got somewhere from somebody, but anyways, it's all going to be new to my collection. Okay, Saturday is the final episode of rock legend Steve Howe Part C. I've had 2 so far. The first one was on his career with Yes. The second one was on his solo album career. This one will be on all the other stuff. Okay, so then we have, those are the weekly shows that we'll be doing. So all that is out there. So the next thing is to talk about the series. So some of you have been looking forward to the series. A couple people have said they are. I've been preparing this because I don't want to rush anything like I did with the last series, because I didn't take into consideration the time factor involved in listening to 31 albums. Now in the last one it wasn't too bad because most of the albums I was already familiar with, like pretty much all of them I was familiar with to some extent. Many of them I didn't own, but I was familiar with them. And so then re-listening to them wasn't too hard, right? But this one, because of the way this is structured, I'm not going to be familiar with any of it. I won't know any of it. I've hopefully not heard a single thing from any of these before. And then I have to give you an impression on one listen. So that's going to be a little tough and dicey. So I've got actually a head start and done a couple of them already to give myself some breathing space. So, and in this case, it's not going from favorites to least, from most favorites to, or least favorites to most favorites, because I don't know any of them, so how can I be that way? I didn't do it alphabetically, which maybe might have been an idea, but I just decided I wanted to do that because you may end up with 2 or 3 bands from the same period of time that I'm very familiar with, and it kind of drags a bit. You want to space that out. So for those of you who don't know what this series is about, I'll be doing 31 albums that were progressive rock albums from the 1980s. That's it. There's no more qualification for it, except for that they will all be albums I've never heard before. And they could be from bands that I'm very familiar with. I may own lots of stuff by them. They could be from bands that I own at least one album and I'm quite familiar with their work, but I don't own this one. They may be from bands I've heard of and know a little bit about their music, but don't necessarily heard too much of it, and in this case I won't have heard this album at all. The last category will be bands I do not know and have never heard any of their music before, and there's a few of those. There's quite a few of those actually. So the funny thing that happened was that when I did the Ben's album challenge last week and I put that other Angels Face to Face album, I discovered that it was a French band, but that the person who had done the video with the entire album on it had changed it and called it The Angels Face to Face, which my French isn't too bad, so the group is called La Ange, and the album was in French as well. I guess it loosely translated as Face to Face, and La Ange loosely translates as The Angel. I'm guessing. I don't know this for a fact. But the funny part is when I went back to look at the albums I had on my list for my upcoming series, sure enough, there was an album on here called La Ange, a group here called La Ange, for a different album. So it's weird. But because I had listened to this one and realized that they have a bit of a progressive element to the music, they're much more hard rock, heavy metal. So I decided to excommunicate them from this list, and I will have to add a couple of albums actually, because I took the Asia one off too, because I don't really consider Asia to be progressive rock. Yes, it has some progressive elements and has a lot of progressive players, but the album is very kind of poppy, commercial sounding, and so I was trying to stay away from that. So if I can avoid that before I get to the album, that's great. Then I'll be able to replace that with a couple of other groups, and there's a couple others that I was interested in doing, so this gives a space opening for them. So anyway, for you who don't know about that series, that's what we're going to be doing. So it'll be called, I believe I have it down as my I think I have it down as progressive rock albums from the 1980s, and this will be one album per band, so you won't get multiple albums from a band. It's not going to happen. There's 31 bands, 31 albums, and I wanted to give a little bit of everything. It's the basic thing for this is to try and show some variety, and to try and show as much of the genre as we can get in the 1980s. And I have to admit, when I started this channel, I didn't know. One of my worries was, am I going to be able to find enough progressive rock to keep a channel going? Because to me, there was maybe 12 progressive rock bands in the world. That's how naive I was. I did not even realize there was any progressive rock other than Marillion in the 1980s, and whatever bands stuck with the progressive elements from the 1970s, which most of them didn't. So I thought it's going to be tough to find. And this came up because Ben had said, not Ben, my DP had said to me, "Can you do a top 10 favorite progressive rock albums from the 1980s?" And I said, when he first said, I said, no, because there isn't that many. That was my opinion. I don't think there is that many, and I don't know that I know that many. So when I went and looked, I was like overwhelmed with how much there is. So progressive rock did not die at the end of the 70s. It died in North America, yes, but most of the rest of the world kept on and produced like a ton of really good stuff. So that's what we're going to be discussing. So the first three videos will come out this week: Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I'm going to try and release all the videos at 8 a.m. like I did with my last series. And as long as I keep ahead of it, it should happen. It's only what happens is sometimes I have something else going on and I do that, and then the next morning I'm supposed to do this album and I can't because I have something, I have to be somewhere and I can't do it. So I'm going to try and keep it up so that there's one every morning for the 31 days of December, and there won't be no Christmas albums. I'm sorry. So anyways, the first one will be Barclay James Harvest, Face to Face, coincidentally. And it seems to be what's going on. And day 2 will feature IQ, Take It, Tales from the Lush Attic. I've listened to this album in its entirety. I am very impressed with it, but you're going to get that when we go to the video. He'll tell you more about it then. And then the third album I chose from a very somewhat obscure group who actually had 6 albums come out that they put out on their own, all on cassette. So they had recorded all this stuff on cassette and was selling it at their concerts where they would go. It's kind of novel, you know, in some ways. Like they would put a concert on, and if you liked what you heard, you could go to their booth and buy the cassette that they had made up, right? But they didn't have any albums or CD, and they had no record label. And that's for like six separate cassettes. And then they produced their first album on a record label on a CD. And that was the one that we're going to do, which is, the group is called Oztic Tentacles, and the album is Pungent Effulgent. Pungent Effulgent. I think that's how you say it. Anyways, I'm looking forward to continuing with so next week we'll do day 4, 5, 6, 7, so on. So there'll be one for each day coming out at 8. And they're not in any particular order. It's just however I think they fit nicely into the mold. I'm trying to do a little bit of everything, so I don't. You're going to get some bands I'm a little familiar with, some I'm not so familiar with. You may get a band I'm very familiar with, but I don't know these albums. So I'm just trying to space it out so we don't get too much of the same in a row, you know. Okay, so there we have it. That's what's going on this week. I know this is a very long episode, but I felt like talking about that particular item I did at the beginning. I thought it was important to tell my viewers that that's what's going on from my perspective, and that I am not here for the general public. You know, it'd be nice if the general public found it interesting, but I by no means feel that's necessary, you know, because I'll just tell you one last story before we cut out. I was working at a place, and there was a guy in there. He was really into playing guitar, and he played in a band and stuff like that. And he asked me, what kind of music do I like? I said, well, I like lots of different types of music. Progressive rock's my favorite. He said, oh, progressive rock, eh? Yeah. What bands do you like? I said, well, Rush is my favorite. Mistake, because for the next however long I was working there, every time he would see me, I had to listen to his rendition of Tom Sawyer. He said, and then a couple times when we were in the cafeteria and there's some people in there and somebody said, oh, you like music? And then he immediately answered for me saying, oh yeah, he's a huge Tom Sawyer fan. I didn't have the heart to tell him that that's the one Rush song I hope I never hear again because it's been killed. Anyways, this is how the general fan views me sometimes. Anyways, I hope you have a great day. Please like, subscribe. It's much appreciated. And we'll be back with Ben's album challenge tonight. I hope you will enjoy that as well as I will. Thank you. Bye.